I'm Nancy Grace. The story of Michael Jackson's life can be described many ways. A mystery fairy tale, a tragedy. June 2009, Jackson tries to write another chapter of his life. On the verge of a comeback, he hopes it will launch him back to the top. Instead, Jackson found dead at age 50 in an LA mansion, dead of acute propofol intoxication, shot up with a super powerful surgical anesthetic. His private doctor, Conrad Murray, charged with his death. As the manslaughter trial begins, prosecutors and defense present their version of the last days and the final hours of Michael Jackson's life.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that Michael Jackson literally put his life in the hands of Conrad Murray. That misplaced trust in the hands of Conrad Murray cost Michael Jackson his life.
The prosecution was trying to set a tone that the final responsibility lies with Dr. Conrad Murray, that we were not to put Michael Jackson on trial here, that he was not the defendant, that he was the victim.
On June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead. He was just 50 years old. He died alone in his bed on the second floor of his Holmby Hills mansion.
Prosecutors got to tell their whole story and tell the jury, listen, this is the significant stuff that, in our view, makes this man a killer.
And what we learned through that investigation is that propofol, lidocaine, diazepam, lorazepam, and midazolam, all testing positive in the heart blood, all administered by Conrad Murray. The coroner's office concluded this was, in fact, a homicide.
David Walgren was very successful in trying to show Dr. Murray as being incompetent. I mean, he laid it out.
Conrad Murray figuratively and literally abandoned Michael Jackson. He left this vulnerable man filled with Valium and midazolam and lorazepam and propofol with no medical monitoring equipment, no necessary resuscitative equipment. He left him there, abandoned him to fend for himself.
And the prosecution just really told the story. It made for an extremely credible opening statement.
Conrad Murray acted with gross negligence and an extreme departure from the standard of care and was a cause of Michael Jackson's death. You also need to know a little bit about propofol. It is not a sleep aid, it is not a sleep agent. It is a general anesthetic. It is used in a hospital to put you under.
I mean, the fact that it's being used outside of a hospital is already a gross deviation from usual use. If in a hospital, it's under very carefully monitored situations where the patient's breathing, pulse, blood pressure is continuously monitored, if not by an anesthesiologist, at least by a nurse.
You have to ensure, as the doctor in charge, as the doctor with the legal duty of care, that you can manage any consequences that come forward.
The minimum would be things to restore respiration, ambu bag, endotracheal tubes, things to keep the airways open and functioning, and then defibrillators and things to restore the heart function should there be a catastrophe.
Conrad Murray made a voice recording on his iPhone.
The prosecution surprised everybody by playing Michael Jackson's voice in court. And as we heard it, it was something that none of us expected.
You will hear the whole recording during this trial, but I'll play a clip now so you can have a taste of what Conrad Murray knew.
When people leave my show, I want to say, I've never seen nothing like this in my life.
One thing we knew going into the trial was that the Jackson family members were going to be right there front and center.
Sometimes it was Catherine and Joe, sometimes it was Janet and Randy.
I was sitting right behind the family, and I saw them look at each other, They were shocked.
It was so jarring and really so sad that he was so desperate for sleep that he would be drugged like that he would sound like no one we would ever recognize.
The people will ask you in no uncertain terms to return with a verdict of guilty for the solitary crime charged, involuntary manslaughter.
At this time, Mr. Chernoff, does the defense wish to present an opening statement? You may.
You will never be asked to determine whether Dr. Murray should have been the cause of Michael Jackson's death. You will be asked to determine who was the cause of Michael Jackson's death.
What does that mean? They're going to put front and center Michael Jackson.
The evidence in this case, we believe, is going to show you this. During the 10 hours on June 25th, 2009, while Michael Jackson was frustrated because he could not sleep, frustrated because his doctor refused to give him a drug that he preferred, that he wanted, he did an act that caused his own death.
Somebody's responsible. It's one of two people, so the defense is saying, well, it's not our client, it's not Dr. Murray, so it's the victim. Risky move.
When Dr. Murray left the room, Michael Jackson self-administered a dose of propofol that, with the lorazepam, created a perfect storm in his body that killed him instantly. There was no CPR, there was no doctor, no paramedic, no machine that was going to revive Michael Jackson.
The idea of a perfect storm is not reality. The reality is that when people receive medications like lorazepam and propofol together especially, they stop breathing, and then minutes later, their heart stops. But if you get to them when they're not breathing properly, things can be reversed completely and the patient can be saved easily.
But the evidence is not going to show that Dr. Murray did it.
All they have to do is introduce doubt and tell that jury on closing arguments, if you believe there's another theory here that Michael Jackson could have somehow given himself the fatal drug, then you have to acquit.
Dr. Murray is not a perfect man. He's an imperfect man, like all of us. That I grant you. But in this criminal court, we believe he's not guilty. Thank you.
The state tries to prove involuntary manslaughter against Jackson's private doctor, Conrad Murray. Prosecutors and state's witnesses hound on the phrase deviations from the standard of care. What they say describes Murray's actions while treating the music icon.
Mr. Sayer, may I have the lights, please?
The most fascinating part of the beginning of the prosecution's case was where they took us. I mean, they took us to a place where we've never been, and that's, inside Michael Jackson's house.
Does that view accurately depict the way the bedroom looked when you entered into it?
Yes, it does.
This was the first time we're seeing inside of Michael Jackson's bedroom this intensely private person. And the thing that really shocked me, all the pills, the pill bottles all over the room. Not only that, that crude IV setup, it didn't look healthy.
All Michael Jackson's employees who were at the house the day he died testified, and they painted the picture of chaos and bedlam.
He was laying on his back with his hands extended out. His eyes were slightly open.
I saw Dr. Murray come down the stairs into the kitchen in a panic.
He appeared very nervous, frantic.
And he was shouting.
I mean, who wants their doctor to react that way? Doctors are the ones who need to be composed.
The most egregious shortfall in the resuscitation attempt of Michael Jackson was the fact that Dr. Murray did not call 911. That is always the first order of business. When you're a medical student, even people that aren't even medically trained, how we train them is first assess your resources. Who knows CPR? Secondly, you call 911. Then you start resuscitating the patient. He did none of that.
What the prosecution was able to do through a series of witnesses was weave a theory that Dr. Conrad Murray is more concerned about covering up what has just happened inside that room than taking care of Michael Jackson.
What were the exact words he said when he had these vials in his hand and he was reaching them out to you?
He said, put these in a bag.
Did he then ask you or tell you to grab another item?
Yes, he did. He pointed towards the IV stand, and he said, now grab that bag and put that in the blue bag.
The prosecution's trying to get at this one simple concept, that instead of focusing all your energies on Michael Jackson, you're telling somebody to pick up all these different things. Get that, get this bottle, go over there. What does that have to do with saving this man's life?
What Conrad Murray isn't saying is also being used against him.
Did you ever hear Dr. Murray state that he had given Mr. Jackson propofol?
No, ma'am. He never mentioned the word propofol.
Made no mention of propofol.
Correct.
And he never mentioned propofol to you?
Absolutely not.
I think the prosecution scored big points right there, because what doctor do you know would not give the full picture of what he was giving his patient unless he had something to hide? And then we got to the point where the prosecution played more of that tape of Michael Jackson, recorded by Dr. Conrad Murray.
I'm taking that money. I'm really shouldn't. Michael Jackson should be talked to.
I think that people were shocked. Fans were sitting in the back row of the courtroom, and they were crying as they heard Michael Jackson slurring his speech.
I mean, for the prosecution, this is huge. Now your victim is not some selfish, greedy guy who wants to go make $100 million with these shows. This is a guy who wants to do good.
I care about the haters. God wants me to do it. God wants me to do it. I'm gonna do it, Conrad. I knew you would.
Another fascinating aspect of this case, the audio tape of Dr. Murray talking to cops 2 days after Michael Jackson died.
I mean, I love Mr. Jackson. He was my friend.
He went in there trying to massage the situation, and he just got himself deeper.
3 days before his death, I started to wean Mr. Jackson from propofol.
He admitted that he gave propofol to Michael Jackson night after night after night. That just set off alarm bells with these detectives.
Prosecutors are using this tape because it locks Conrad Murray into a story. And it's a story that can be contradicted by other witnesses' testimony, and prosecutors know that. Prosecution gold.
The magnitude of this case, the fact that it's a homicide, became most apparent when that autopsy photo was displayed to the jury.
One of the most stunning revelations that people aren't making much of is that Michael Jackson had received so many drug injections, IV drug injections. Same thing as what a junkie does, but now administered by a doctor. So many of those that he had no veins left in his body. The only patients I ever come in contact with that have that problem are severe, long-standing IV drug-using junkies.
You changed the blue clamp on the saline.
There is nothing stronger than visuals for the jury to see. And we have had a lot of visuals in this case.
Pill bottle after pill bottle after pill bottle, drug after drug after drug.
If you're in that jury box, you're saying, what was going on in Michael Jackson's bedroom? It's a pharmacy of drugs.
We are in pharmacological never land here. Something that's only been done to Michael Jackson and to no one else in history, to the best of my knowledge.
What was the cause of death, Dr. Rogers?
The cause was acute propofol intoxication.
At the heart of the prosecution's case is how the propofol gets into Michael Jackson. According to prosecutors, it was through an IV drip that was set up by Dr. Conrad Murray.
Michael Jackson has died, but he's died with the infusion running. And that's why the levels are high. He has died with the infusion still going. So there's no opportunity for this rapid metabolism of propofol to occur.
And in your opinion, is the use of propofol as part of a doctor's medical practice to treat insomnia gross negligence?
Yes, it's indicated for procedures and patient comfort, not for sleep. That's extreme deviation from the standard of care.
This is absolutely clear to me, that if the deviations from the standard of care had not happened, Michael Jackson would be alive today. There's no doubt. But you have to remember, well before those deviations from the standard of care, this relationship was spiraling into a disaster. The nature of what the relationship between the doctor and the patient, how it was set up, and how badly adulterated it was, could not go well for the patient.
And so the prosecution tried to lead to this point of this is all the stuff that was there. And Dr. Murray, guess what, folks? He's in charge. He's the one who's in this room giving these drugs to Michael Jackson. Up until this point, we had heard a lot about the drugs in Michael Jackson's room and a lot of technical information about those drugs. But then it was time for the ladies of Dr. Murray.
Oh my goodness. They all stepped into the courtroom. A parade of beautiful young women.
What if you were a guy who had many girlfriends and every single one of them were paraded in front of a jury and the world to see?
They wanted to show in a subtle or perhaps not so subtle way that Dr. Murray is a player.
They made it clear that this was a man who liked to hit on women.
Did you meet him at a social type club?
Yes.
Did the defendant give you his telephone number?
Yes.
Did your relationship progress to something beyond friendship?
Yes.
The cumulative effect of all those yeses, well, I think it said really a lot about Dr. Conrad Murray without having to spell it out.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Hey, look, he has the right to date whoever he wants. But keep in mind,
what the jury doesn't know is that he's married.
Yeah, he's married.
And you know, any trial, as serious as it may be or may become, it's got to have some comic relief, right?
And we were provided that in spades by Nicole Alvarez.
I couldn't believe I was meeting Michael Jackson.
And the way she described her profession was hilarious. Unintentionally, perhaps, but totally hilarious.
When you refer to an instrument, what are you referring to?
Myself.
I see.
Myself. As an actor, your instrument is yourself.
And that exploded on Twitter. And it was like, her instrument? What does she mean by her instrument? And everybody's mind went there.
I am my instrument. I am an instrument.
And the entire day, everybody was joking about their instrument.
You look at Dr. Conrad Murray, the whole time, he's sitting like this. He's not happy. He was sitting out there saying, what are you doing on that stand? You are sinking my case.
Typically, his personal life wouldn't have any place in this trial, but he happened to talk to all these women. They're part of the timeline of what he was doing when he should have been paying attention to Michael Jackson.
Of all the women that took the stand, Sade Anding, I think, was the most relevant.
June 25th of 2009, did Conrad Murray call you that day?
Yes.
That's who he's on the phone with. At the moment, he realizes that his one and only $150,000 a month patient is in distress.
And what did he say to you?
He just said, well, and then paused.
And then what happened?
I said, hello, hello, and I didn't hear anything. And I heard mumbling of voices. It sounded like the phone was maybe in his pocket or something. It was shh, and I heard coughing.
Think about this. He's on the phone with her, not with his patient.
Where is Conrad Murray's focus? Is he focused on his patient, Michael Jackson, or is he focused on his girlfriend? That's the problem for the defense.
Welcome back. I'm Nancy Grace. Dr. Conrad Murray's lawyers try everything to defend the private live-in doctor from manslaughter charges, putting Michael Jackson himself on trial, attempting to rehabilitate Murray's character, and trying to create reasonable doubt.
We're going to resume with the defense presentation.
The only way to really defend this case was to put Michael Jackson on trial.
Have you formed an opinion about whether or not by May 4th or even earlier that Michael Jackson was dependent on Demerol?
Yes.
Well, the defense put on a full court press that Michael Jackson was an addict.
What is that opinion?
I believe there's evidence that he was dependent upon Demerol.
What about addicted?
Possibly.
Dependency on Demerol is something that comes late in the process of addiction. You use enough drugs that eventually develop tolerance and withdrawal.
Did he mention to you any specific medicine that he hoped to obtain for these sleep issues?
He asked me about intravenous sleep medicine.
Did he happen to mention the name of this medicine?
I think he used the word juice. I don't think I heard the word of a specific medication.
Not only did they have people saying that Michael Jackson had addiction to certain drugs, then we learned that that addiction could lead to sleeplessness.
Insomnia is a symptom just like fever. It's not a diagnosis. I mean, sometimes we can't come up with a diagnosis, but in this case, there was a clear diagnosis. He was in drug withdrawal. He had drug dependency, was taking opiates and benzodiazepines in massive quantities, and in the night hours, when he was no longer receiving them, he would enter into withdrawal. A great way to treat that withdrawal and put the patient to sleep, propofol.
Please raise your right hand.
We also heard from this nurse practitioner, Cherilyn Lee, who was very believable.
The defense called Cherilyn Lee to paint the picture of Michael Jackson as being someone who's desperate. Michael Jackson, someone who is an addict. Michael Jackson, someone who will do anything to get the drug that he wants.
He said, I have a lot of problems sleeping. The only medication that really helps me to fall off to sleep right away is Deprivan.
She warned Michael Jackson. She said, hey, this propofol, you don't want to do it. This stuff can really hurt you. It can kill you.
Defense wanted to make a lot of points with her, namely that Michael Jackson knew about propofol, had propofol, and was demanding propofol. But the prosecution also wanted to make points with Cherilyn Lee.
You indicated to Michael Jackson, I understand you want a good night's sleep. You want to be, quote, and you use, quote, knocked out. But what if you don't wake up? Correct?
Yes.
And he responded again, I will be okay. I only need someone to monitor me with the equipment while I sleep.
Yes, that's exactly what he said.
And that played right into the state's theory in this case, that it was lack of monitoring Michael Jackson that really caused his death.
The prosecution did a pretty dynamite job of painting Dr. Conrad Murray as a ladies' man at best, a cad at worst.
But the defense had an answer for that. They brought in all of his former patients who clearly loved him.
That man sitting there is the best doctor I've ever seen.
I have never had a doctor that was more caring.
I've gone to a lot of doctors, and I've never had one who gave me the care that he did.
Do you think Dr. Murray's greedy?
Do I think?
Yes, ma'am.
No. If this man had been greedy, excuse me, Judge. If this man had been greedy, he never would have come to an area or community of Acreage Home, 75% of them poor.
Ruby Mosley's testimony showed us a side of Dr. Murray that we hadn't seen.
He made a commitment to the community that he would open a clinic in honor of his dad.
Obviously, this affected the doctor, maybe to see these patients that he had treated in the past, but also to hear what they were saying about him.
Another stunning moment in court with the character witnesses. Jerry Causey took the stand.
He's my best friend.
But it was after his testimony that really mattered. You see, he walks off the stand, he walks right over to Dr. Murray, he reaches over to shake his hand, and he kisses him on the forehead.
It's not necessary.
It's great when, as a physician, you can care deeply for and about your patients, and even when you can express affection towards them, and to be friendly, but we can never be their friend. It adulterates the relationship, and nowhere more so is that important than when somebody has mental health issue or addiction. Then it becomes horrific for the patient.
We'd like to call Dr. Paul White.
Thank you. Dr. Paul White was the star witness for the defense. He was the anesthesiology expert, and he was there to contradict Dr. Stephen Schaefer, the star anesthesiology witness for the prosecution.
I was somewhat perplexed as to how the determination had been made by essentially all of the experts that Dr. Murray was infusing propofol.
Dr. Paul White was the father of propofol, the guy who was going to lay out an alternate theory for the defense, namely that Michael Jackson killed himself by self-injecting propofol.
That shows Dr. Murray giving 6 injections of 50 milligrams each.
That's what it suggests. It would mean putting Michael Jackson at deep sedation or even approaching unconsciousness, waiting till he barely wakes up, and then slamming him down again repeatedly.
Dr. White is crucial to the defense because you need some doctor, someone who is respected, someone who has studied this stuff to get up on the stand and say, hey, it wasn't the way the prosecution says. It wasn't Dr. Conrad Murray who killed Michael Jackson.
So you think it was a self-injection of propofol near the hour of between 11:30 and 12 o'clock that they did it?
In my opinion, yes.
All of that, I think, set up a perfect construct for the defense to be able to say, could he have done these things? And that's all they want to accomplish. Could Michael Jackson have been the cause of his own death?
Closing arguments, crucial. The time for prosecutors and the defense to wrap up their cases. A final pitch to the jury. Take a listen to closings in the Michael Jackson manslaughter trial.
This case will come down to whether or not you believe Conrad Murray acted with gross negligence or criminal negligence in his treatment of Michael Jackson.
David Walgren is a machine. As a prosecutor in this closing, he was methodical, perfectionistic.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. The evidence in this case is abundantly clear that Conrad Murray acted with criminal negligence.
His closing argument was, I would call it clinical. He had everything lined up, very well organized.
Conrad Murray left Prince, Paris, and Blanket without a father.
In the first 2 minutes of the closing argument, I counted that he had referred to Michael Jackson's children 6 different times.
For them, this case doesn't end today or tomorrow or the next day. For Michael's children, this case will go on forever.
What David Walgren did to a T in this closing argument was using the defense's witnesses to make his own points.
You've heard from many doctors in this case who told you that if they were presented with this situation, they would absolutely say no and walk away.
He kept repeating this refrain. No other doctor would do what Conrad Murray did.
Michael Jackson trusted Conrad Murray. He trusted him with his life, but Conrad Murray corrupted that relationship, and for that, Michael Jackson paid with his life.
The jury was intently focused. There was one juror in the back row, a female, and she literally was on the edge of her seat, focused forward. I thought she just wanted to jump out of the jury box and into Walgren's arms.
Even if you accept the defense version of the facts, even if one of you accepts that version of the facts, Conrad Murray is criminally guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
And then it was time for the defense to fight back.
The prosecution during these 6 weeks have absolutely failed to prove a crime. Most disturbing of all, he tells you that he doesn't have to prove a direct and causal connection to the death of Michael Jackson when prosecuting Dr. Murray. That's the most disturbing thing, because that's exactly what he has to do.
Ed Chernoff was focused on causation, the idea that can you definitively say, jury, that there was a drip here? If there wasn't a drip, then isn't it a possibility that Michael Jackson could have injected that propofol himself?
They spent 6 weeks trying to prove a drip. Because without a drip, then what Dr. Murray gave Michael Jackson absolutely would not have harmed him without an unusual and intervening circumstance.
He was making the point that if you don't believe there was a drip, you must acquit.
The road to not guilty, the road to freedom, was to point the finger somewhere else. But there's only 2 people in the room. So they pointed the finger right at Michael Jackson.
They want you to convict Dr. Murray for the actions of Michael Jackson. They just don't want to tell you that.
Blaming the victim, for me, was a very disturbing strategy. The fact is, when someone is an addict, and naturally, as a result of their condition, they're going to engage in behaviors that are problematic, it is our responsibility as clinicians, as physicians, to deal with that and to get the proper care to the patient.
Dr. Murray, his greatest personality defect is his greatest character strength.
The defense kept hammering home, Conrad Murray was a good guy caught up in a bad situation.
He got brought into this situation because he thought he could help. He was just a little fish in a big, dirty pond.
Ed Chernoff's closing argument, I thought it was just very, very strong because he has a much more relaxed way about him.
He connects well with jurors. He's comfortable in front of a jury.
I think the prosecution had a much stronger case, but it certainly was doing the best he could with what he had.
It's easy in hindsight to say that he's a lousy doctor. It's easy to make those statements when you've never walked in that man's shoes.
Ed Chernoff is a charismatic guy. He looks good. He has authority in his voice, but I think he relied on that a little too much. His presentation was kind of sloppy. It seemed sort of off the cuff. It was almost like he was winging it.
So I hope that you do the right thing and find Dr. Murray not guilty. Thank you.
At this time, the people have an opportunity to present a rebuttal argument. Mr. Walgren.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
The best part of being a prosecutor is that you go last.
He came out swinging.
This is bizarre, unethical, unconscionable behavior.
This was the passionate, almost angry prosecutor that we hadn't seen so far in this case, but it came out right now.
This is not just kind of a deviation or an error in judgment. This is criminal, gross negligence.
In every one of these big cases, there's always a line, a phrase that people repeat and they remember, sometimes for decades.
Poor Conrad Murray.
Poor Conrad Murray.
Poor Conrad Murray.
Don't feel sorry for poor Conrad Murray.
Michael Jackson is dead. And we have to hear about poor Conrad Murray.
He brought it home. He really looked at that jury and said, hey, Michael Jackson would be alive today were it not for the actions of Dr. Conrad Murray.
I ask that you return with a verdict of guilty for the solitary count of involuntary manslaughter based on Conrad Murray's actions and his actions alone.
And then the jury began their deliberations.
And welcome back. We are on Verdict Watch in the Michael Jackson death trial.
We all have that sense of anticipation. What is going to happen?
That announcement could come at any moment.
As this jury went to deliberations, all of us were thinking, well, we could have a verdict in the day. We could have a verdict in a couple of hours.
And then Monday morning, 11 a.m. LA time, we got word.
Here we go, folks. We are just moments away from a verdict in the trial of the man accused of killing Michael Jackson.
The jury had reached a verdict.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Conrad Robert Murray, guilty of the crime of involuntary manslaughter.
Think about how his life changed in just a moment. You go from medical doctor to convicted killer.
There was a scream, there was a cheer. One woman just collapsed and fainted on the ground. It was extraordinary.
It's not going to bring Michael back, but I'm just so happy for the family.
Dr. Murray's reckless conduct in this case poses a demonstrable risk to the safety of the public. I conclude that remand is appropriate. Dr. Murray is remanded to the custody of the Los Angeles Sheriff with no bail.
The sheriff's deputy, Jason Jones, went right up to him and put those handcuffs on him.
That's when I saw the reality hit him.
1202.4, and
I don't think he was expecting it at all.
And I have to say, I had compassion for him. It was horribly humiliating.
Hearing that word guilty, seeing him taken away, for me, brought a sense that, hey, our system works.
Catherine is approaching me now, surrounded by law enforcement.
Shortly afterwards, when the family is leaving the courthouse, you got a sense that they felt a sense of justice.
I saw them walking toward me as they headed to their cars.
Justice was served, yes. It wasn't enough time, though.
What would you say for Mike?
Michael's with us. Michael's with us.
Michael loves everybody out here. I love him. We all love him. And guess what? He was in that courtroom, and that's why victory was served.
Dr. Conrad Murray, guilty, adding a final chapter to the legacy and the legend of the King of Pop.
For me now, after this trial, I still have two different Michael Jacksons in my brain that just don't jive with each other. I have Michael Jackson, who had problems sleeping and was feeble and weak, and then I have Michael Jackson, who was so astute and creative and was on top of his game.
Before this trial, if you asked me a question about him or to name one word that describes Michael Jackson, I would say genius. What makes me sad is that after this trial, the word I used to describe Michael Jackson is propofol.
Here are two lives that came together. Dr. Murray actually really did care about Michael Jackson. But these two lives collided, and one man is dead and one man is in prison. That is a very sad story. And the man that is dead was served so poorly by my profession. That is what makes me sad. He could have been made better. He could have been happier. He could have been properly treated, and he was not.
One of the most important things about this trial, it has put a spotlight on the issue of doctor responsibility when it comes to mood-altering substances. This is an epidemic in our country, and we've got to take a good, hard look at what doctors are doing and why they're doing it.
For me, this will be one of the lasting impressions about Michael Jackson, that even in a groggy state that we heard him on these tapes, that he still was so focused on his music and his career that he all he thought about was this upcoming concert and the children.
You heard the words of Michael Jackson wanting to open up this children's hospital to help these kids. And it gave me a warmer feeling about Michael Jackson than I've had in the last decade.
He created a music for a generation in a way that no one ever has. Yet this trial dragged in his lifestyle. And when you think about it, that's not really fair. This man was a superstar. This was a father to 3 children. This man had brothers and sisters and a mother and father that loved him. Yet he was put on trial.
I think as the dust settles, now that the trial is over, I think people will go back to remembering Michael for the legacy that is important. And that was his ability to entertain us, to sing to us, to dance for us like nobody else could.
I think this trial creates more of a tragic figure, someone that becomes so missed that we now take our time to think more about the incredible things that he created that will live on forever.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Nancy Grace. Good night, friend.